Well, here we are. It's Sunday. Shed talk time. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Jam Shed and this week's episode of Shed Talk. And what is on my mind? Lots of things. I've been down the rabbit hole on several different gear-related explorations, as well as watching some interesting videos that have been put on YouTube. And you know what? And then the feeds, the gear feeds. There have been some things that have come up in the gear feeds. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the shootout that I did with the Boss Wazacraft DS1W and the standard or the normal production DS1. That was a fun video to shoot. So let's jump right into it. Let's start at the top of this with talking about recording a little bit and the gear that you use for recording. Now, I'm speaking specifically to high gain tones today. I'm not talking about edge of breakup, and I want to be clear. Nothing I'm saying here is gospel, because I've said this before. The only rule in this whole universe of musical instrumentation is that there are none, and you should be creative and want to be curious and explore. That will always be at the forefront of my conversation. So if you're feeling like anything I'm saying is causing you to grab your drink of choice and toss it at the screen, that is not my intention here, because honestly, this community is all about exploring, and while your mileage may vary. So let's talk a little bit about this video that Glenn dropped this week. And it was talking about the SM57 and how it's antiquated. I've got one right behind me on this cab right here. And you know what he was saying? Like, he called it the cockroach of microphones. The best line Glenn has dropped, I think, in a meaningful period of time. To call the SM57 the cockroach of microphones for studio work, and then chase that with, but yet it is an industry standard and it's something that we use, but there might be something different or better, is hilarious to me. And I really appreciate his tongue-in-cheek here with how he tends to view a review or spotlight gear. It always makes me laugh a little bit, because I know what it's going to do for those that love the SM57 and it's their go-to. It is one of the few budget items on the market that people can afford. Put it in front of a speaker and have some semblance of what it should sound like, and Glenn just comes through and trashes it. Calls it the cockroach of the microphone locker, which, you know what, hey, hats off to you, Glenn. This is not a bash at all. I think it's quite funny, and I love that you continue to spark conversation even here. But I don't want to focus on the second part of his video, which is spotlighting another microphone. What I want to talk a little bit about is some of the spirit of what he says and what I agree with there. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with an SM57. It's been used, and that's the reason why I have one on this cab, but I also have another microphone on there because I pair it differently. And again, I think the challenge is always to be curious and explore, and that it doesn't always have to just be an SM57. It became a standard because it was what was available. And was it the best? No. Is it the best? No. I've also purchased another microphone that Glenn had recommended, and at some point I'll pull it and I'll put it on the show a little bit. I think it'll be interesting to do some tests like that to just see. And he was also referencing Steve Albini, and if you don't know Steve, go down a rabbit hole, watch his videos. Thankfully, before his passing, he put a wealth of knowledge on the table, and that's one of the things I deeply respect him for, is that Steve was always candid and he was always willing to share about the craft. And while he had gear that I'll probably never be able to afford to work with, he was also quick to say, I approach things from this positioning. I'm just trying to see what could work, and I'm experimenting, which goes back to the spirit of this channel, being curious. And one of the things that Glenn was covering is miking and the challenges of miking a cabinet to get where you want to be. And when you plug in your SM57 to your preamp and then into an interface and you strum that first chord and you're like, yeah, it sounds nothing like what I've heard on records. And then you spend the next 20 years trying to find and hunt and tone acquisition for what you're hearing in your ears and the sounds that you've heard that made you who you were as an artist and got you inspired. So I can totally relate. Now, Glenn and ours journey aren't that far apart. I started in '97, not owning a studio, but being enthusiastic about it, working in a store and supporting the work and doing the grunt work in a store where there was a studio, and then getting my first version of Cakewalk shortly thereafter, and using the 1/8" input jack with a Radio Shack microphone to record into, and then using a Zoom, and or not a Zoom, it was a Tascam 4 tracks that my buddy had, and just that journey was like mind-blowing for me. I love the recording. I was always the guy that was willing to twist knobs and set things up, and then also the guy who's going to play the drums, or now in this case guitar and bass, and now without a band and playing out, and now I just do it all on my own, and I love that. But realistically, I do love the recording craft, and I've not covered much of that here on the channel. If you're interested in seeing that, I'm still trying to think about like how to do that in a way that would be meaningful. No one needs to see me sitting at the recording desk, you know, twisting knobs and making songs, and I think there's a lot of that out there, and I don't know that I do it better than anybody else. I think the challenge with having a recording channel is that everyone's going to have an opinion of what you're putting out there. Glenn is clear on that, and it almost gets polarizing when you're having these conversations, and so I can appreciate the fact that he wants all the smoke. It's just hard for me, from my perspective, to say, let me put some things out here about how I record in my workflow, because it's mine, because it's what I've done. It's not right or wrong. And I think that's where we get hung up. You did this to get that, or your sound isn't what I hear in my mind. No, I present my curiosity out there, and whether or not you like it matters not to me. It's more so, what value would I bring to the table that doesn't already exist? And I'm not saying I'm not bringing value. I'm just trying to figure out how I would do that in a way that is supportive to maybe all of you. Like, what would I impart to you that doesn't already exist from my own perspective, without, well, while navigating all of the opposite side of what I would be presented. I think I've been clear here since Jump Street. I am not an expert. I don't have, 20 years of experience at the highest level. I do not. I am here in the jam shed, and I'm just making my way through all of this, just like each and every one of you. I am a hobbyist, and I can play instruments. I don't consider myself a guitar player or a drummer. Those folks who are out there in the trenches daily and spend a meaningful period of time of their entire life doing this. This is what I love to do in my spare time. It is not what I do full time. And so, all of that to be said, circling back to Glenn's video, he's just obliterating the SM57 in the most unkind way, and I love it. I'm here for it, but I don't think he's off. Now, going back to where he was referencing Steve Albini, it was really around miking techniques, and there's several. Some people say, if this is the center of the speaker, you put that microphone right on center, and you keep it 4 to 6 inches away, and you measure from there, and you just go with it, and then you can do post-processing. Or some people say, move it left to right. Some people say, turn the SM57 a little bit, and then move it left to right, or up or down, or having it in the top baffled. If you're recording a 4x12 cabinet, that's not, this is a slant straight back here, so the cabinet itself is straight, but the baffle does have a slant, and it's hard to see here. But some say what happens at the bottom sonically is going to be different at the top. And there's so many variables when you're working with a cabinet that you can experience, and I'm not taking away from any of those things. I think all of those variables exist, but the biggest variable is the speaker itself and how it sounds. But then there's the engagement of how it works within the context of the cabinet, where and positioning, and then you have the microphone position. So you're trying to learn all of these things. It reminds me of like the live sound days where you're hearing something and you're going, ooh, I'm getting some sort of feedback loop coming in, and you already have to register at your ears where it's happening, somewhere between 500K and 20K, and you will have to learn those frequencies and hear them. And so it to me, the art of marking or miking a cabinet rather is marking where on the cabinet you're finding the most success for the ones that you're working with, because everyone is different. But Steve's approach is quite unique, and I actually, when he dropped a video, this was years ago, on this miking technique, I absolutely loved it. And he's even pushed even further. Where do you hear sound? When you're playing your guitar, you don't have your ear right up to the speaker, and yet we stick the microphone right there. There's reasons why we do that. Because we don't want all this other input and noise introduced into the sound that we're hearing in the microphone. But he's like, hey, I'm going to pull it way back, and I want to have the ability to capture what's happening, what's coming to that microphone on center. And we're only talking about the studio. I'm not talking about live. But so Glenn is having this conversation, and he's talking about Steve Albini's miking technique, and he said, I have got some new gear. And that's where I go, okay, so we're going to learn how Glenn is implementing something new. And that is fair. That it is fair to say the SM57 doesn't have to always be the microphone, and it's okay to be curious and explore other mic positions. And again, it goes back to your mileage may vary. What happens in my setting is going to be different in yours. And honestly, once you start engaging post-processing, it really gets hard. And we've seen lots of videos, and at some point, I'm gonna do some videos on these because we're considered, you know, like a holy grail set of amplifiers. And I've had the opportunity to play lots of rectifiers, I shouldn't say lots, 4 of them, and compare them, and they all are within the range, very similar to what we see in some of these tests on the bench with pedals. There's this range, and if there's there, you can dial it in. The filter at the end of the signal chain is very important. And the Vintage 30, which Glenn would say, hey, Ray, stop with the Vintage 30 already. Try something different. Put something else in there and see what you get out of that. Now, I'm not chasing that tone. I'm trying to be very consistent here, but I don't disagree with him. And I have a wall with about 6 speakers on it that I swap in and out of this 1x12 cab that I built that was also featured here on the show. And I will use those from time to time. And maybe at some point I will implement a couple of these different ones for some of the shootouts and tone chasing that we will do. But again, back to Glenn's video. I thought it was fascinating that he not only named that, hey, listen, this thing became legendary because it was accessible and it was usable and it was used on records we know and love. And it became the instant tool that you could put your hand on and say, all right, I can go build. You know, if you only have a rubber mallet and you're trying to drive nails into a board, it's problematic. But when you know you have the one tool and it's accessible and affordable, and you can kind of begin to experience things when you're talking about recording a cabinet, yeah, that's why it remains in this status of, look, it's an industry standard. Whether or not you agree with it being the Cockroach or not, I'll leave that up to you guys to wrestle with. For me, I will always have a fond heart for the SM57. I think it's usable on vocals, especially for someone like me who can't sing really well, but tries to do it. It does wonders for my voice. But I also like the fact that he was saying, hey, why don't you try a ribbon microphone? Now, here's what I'll say about this whole thing. Again, I don't have an endless budget. If I did, I'd own every sweet microphone that you could ever imagine on the planet, but I don't. And so I work with what I have to get the sounds that I have. And honestly, some of the sounds that I'm hearing here, even through the signal chain I'm using, which is very simplistic, it truly is. And I'm very happy with what's coming through to you out there in YouTube land. But I love that Glenn was highlighting this one type of microphone, and I'm not gonna worry about the brand. He's already done that. Watch the video. But I'll say I don't have a deep collection of ribbon microphones, and I had this opportunity. There's one floating around here. I'll have to find it, where a friend gave me a ribbon microphone and the ribbon was not functional anymore. And so I tore it apart and had some fun with it and did my own science. And when I pulled it apart, I was like, oh, this is just like tinfoil. Please, again, don't throw your coffee at the screen. I understand it's not tinfoil, but you know exactly what I did to fix it? I went and got some tinfoil. I crinkled it, kind of like those fans that you make with a piece of paper. And I put it back in there and it worked. 100% worked. And it actually sounds really cool. I used literally Reynolds tinfoil, crinkled just like the other one was. I slapped it in there and we're getting sound. Now, it is low gain, but it has this cool sound to it. And that's what triggered me to buy one of these. Now, while that had a lower output and I didn't necessarily lose interest, I just thought, you know, I'll have some other go-tos that I can use really quickly. Well, then, seriously, I think my phone must be listening, because like a day or two later after I fixed it, this MXL R-40 mic came up as one of the picks of the week on Guitar Center just a couple years back. And it was like $39.99. I was like, for a ribbon microphone, also knowing like how they're constructed, I'm like, let's give it a shot. I love this microphone, and I've actually considered getting one more, so I'm waiting for, hey, Guitar Center, if you're listening, give me that lightning deal so I can get another one for $39.99. But for overheads and in-room drumming, this thing is really cool. What it does is exactly what Glenn described. It rolls back some of the highs and takes some of the harshness out of what you're hearing in the room. So if your room is inherently bright, ribbon mics are cool in that way. And I don't know that I have a huge opinion on anything, and I don't, because I don't own many of them. And while most of you are like, MXL, seriously, yeah, MXL, seriously, try it. Why not? Low investment, they're cheap, and maybe you get something cool out of it. Not everything has to have you parting ways with money. And when I pair it with other things, like an SM57, just as Glenn did in his video, I was very surprised at what I got when I started to balance this microphone with that SM57 over there. And I absolutely love what I was getting out of it. And so again, did I part ways with a ton of money to do this? No. Did I part ways with money? Yeah, but I didn't have what I would consider a working ribbon mic, and I did. And what I noticed between this and the one that I fixed is the output on that one is just a little less, but I actually like that, especially if you're putting it in front of a kick drum or something. It really does something cool, and it's a nice supplemental microphone now. And am I recommending you go tear your ribbon microphone apart and put Reynolds tinfoil in it? Sure, if that's what you want to do. Hey, experiment, because again, the only rule is there are none. And so I love the video. I thought it was really good. As far as the company, he was I can't even remember the name. That's why I'm struggling to say what it is. But you know, it looked like they made some cool microphones, and it just triggered me again to go, while I'm getting this intake, it is fun to go, but I already have that, and I don't necessarily need that shiny thing. So maybe you do. Maybe you find one of these on a lightning deal, and maybe that is something you want to consider. You know, an SM57 used anywhere from $50 to $75, or around Christmas time you buy it for $89 and you get a cable and all the rest. Look, it's a great microphone, and it's used all the time. So why not, right? Now we're going to shift from that topic, and I would land it with this. I love the fact that there is a culture out here where we can look at recording and we can explore guitar playing and we can have all these unique experiences, and it can come together, whether it's on a channel or in the basement in your house, and it translates to one thing: creativity. And that this whole musicianship thing is not dying. Acoustical instruments or analog instruments are still a thing, and that makes my heart happy. And that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to just have a good time and give you my random thoughts, and that's what I'm doing. So it was really cool. I was inspired by it. I actually use this microphone daily. I practice when I practice drums. Not right now. I actually injured my foot. I haven't been able to play drums in like almost 8 weeks, which has been awful. I really want to get back to playing. But what I do is I use this microphone, and I will play along with songs on YouTube. And I use an interface, and I just run from the headphone jack from this cheap Lexicon Alpha interface, and I plug this directly into it, and I pull it back from the drum kit and just face it, and it sounds like I'm playing the studio version when I'm playing with drumless tracks on YouTube. It sounds fantastic, and that's why I know it works. So it's serving a totally different purpose. I have like a $22 interface that I'm listening to playback using this microphone for in-room monitoring, and it works fantastic. So again, your mileage may vary, but I was curious. I bought a microphone for $40 and I'm using it daily, and I get to hear its application, and I use it on the cabs. It's always in service here, and it has nothing to do with the name. It has everything to do with how you're applying it, and that goes back to the spirit of what Glenn was saying and also what Steve Albini was saying. I choose to do it this way because I am hearing it from this direction, and I'm going to try it. And by the way, it worked for me. It might not work for you, but you know what? Now you have something that you can try. All right. Leaving that on to the next part of our segment, which was what has been in my feeds. We talk about the shed list, and that will come up. I think I'm going to do those more sparingly. I'll unpack some of that here, and if there's something more compelling that I want to share. But lately, there has been something in my feed, and it's the brand DOD, and of course, the enticement was real. And I was doing some searching, and so Jason Lamb is the creator of the FX series. Maybe not all of them. Again, I'm not the expert here, but I know he's the one that designed this grunge pedal. He's no longer with us, and so thank you, and Jason, for all you did and your contributions here, because these pedals are super cool. And so I picked up its counterpart, and the reason why I picked it up is completely hilarious, because I actually like the fact that DOD had a sense of humor in the 90s. I mean, it definitely likens to me as a 80s, 90s kid when you have loud butt, face, and grunge on the knobs, because you get a chuckle out of it. But this one's even more hilarious, and that's why it caught my eye. And the reason, not only because it has hilarious things on it, let's talk about that. It says rip, guts, pain, and scream, and it's called the Death Metal. And again, I just couldn't resist the splattered paint and all of that, and I thought, you know what, getting these two together for a grudge match amongst some of these other pedals, the Metal Zone and this Distortion, DS1 Wazacraft, and gain staging, we can have a lot of fun with this, and it's going to bring a lot of fun content. And again, I'm going to continue to be curious, and the little jams that I'm putting together alongside of these will come alongside of this as I am unpacking these different opportunities for us to be curious and explore. So that was one of the highlights I wanted to give about things that were coming into my feed, and we'll definitely be featuring this pedal likely this week in some sort of grudge match. That also brings me to something I want to add to where we're headed with the channel. My hope is to have a video come out on Wednesday and then or Friday. So we'll keep that flow. It'll either be Wednesday or Friday. I'll try to drop. Like I said, this week I had to do a tweak and release the Grudge Match yesterday on Saturday, and then we will always have these conversations around a Shed Talk. So pivoting from the pedal that was in my feed, just kind of inspiring me. Another thing that came up in conversation, having some email exchange with a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, and someone that has inspired my journey, was talking about some of the equipment that he was using on some of the songs that I absolutely love that no one really probably knows. Just a small group of people who followed this group back in the 90s, and someday I'll be featuring a really good video on them. But I was asking him about some of the gear that he used on some of the songs, and he said, well, one of the guitars I used was called a Gibson Nighthawk. Now, I don't have all the details yet on that, but I found myself down this rabbit hole researching Gibson Nighthawks because, just like all of you, there are sounds that we want to replicate. There are sounds that inspired us, and we want the gear that is associated with those sounds. Now, I will be the first to say that there's no reason to part way with your money when it comes to any piece of gear or the sounds it's producing, because at the end of it, it was all heavily produced if you're listening to it on a studio record, and you can replicate much of that. So while you'll never get it perfect, because again, the most important thing in that whole situation will be me and how I'm leveraging that gear, it's going to be different. But here I was researching Gibson Nighthawk electric guitars, and if you have an affinity for those, I would love to hear what your comments are on that. And again, I was down this nostalgic rabbit hole going, how cool would it be to have a Gibson Nighthawk in the collection to recreate some of these tones that really shaped who I am as a musician, from drums to bass and electric guitar. And the cool thing is I actually own one of these guitars because this individual was kind enough to gift me one of them. And thank you. And because it's the guitar that really kicked it off for me with all of this journey to be in front of you all today. So while I've labored that longer than I needed to, I am doing some research on a Nighthawk. I'm very curious about it. They're an interesting looking guitar. They definitely have their own feel, and I'm actually curious. I'll have to ask him why the Nighthawk during that time. Why was that your choice? And there are several versions of that. So those of you who know more than I do about it, please feel free to help my tone acquisition syndrome this week with some additional information about what you know of them. All right, now I've lost track of where I am for my last point, but I think we can. Where were we? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I have one more thing I think that's worth having a little bit of conversation about, and it goes back to the spirit of the test we did with the DS1s and the Wazacraft, and now having a couple chances to watch it back and reflect on that. It's fascinating. Boss pedals, you are phenomenal. Let me just say that, and I'm not looking for any type of sponsorship. I want nothing from you, but I just think your pedals are really cool, and you've done a great job of marketing things and putting tweaks on things that give us some sort of dynamic expectation around why we would have one over the other. So I have a DS1 for a reason, or I might have a Wazacraft for a reason, or there might be a reason for me to get a Wazacraft version, or maybe find an original. There's so much out there, and that is fun. It's kind of like I've said before. You start with just the primary colors and the crayon box, and then you go to the next one and the next one, and now you know you're at like 64 crayons. And while that can be daunting, if you started at the beginning and you're gaining a knowledge of how to leverage all those colors, it's really cool. And so one of the things I picked out of the shootout, and as I was reflecting on it, is the Metal Zone that has sold over 1 million copies, which still blows my mind. I'm curious, like, how much Metal Zone is in these, like, the overdrive pedals and the distortion pedals. And when I think about the Metal Zone, how much can it do against other distortion pedals? I think a lot. Now, I'm not going to do the cavalcade of purchasing a bunch of distortion pedals. As I find some that are reasonable, certainly will pick them up and do some testing. But there's Behringer pedals, there's lots to compare. But let me just say, the Metal Zone to me is very impressive. And one shootout that we will do, one grudge match that's going to happen, is the Metal Zone versus the DS1 Wazacraft. Because the Metal Zone also has this big bump versus the gain, I mean. So if you had it turned up all the way versus another pedal, the Metal Zone is significantly louder, and I'm wondering if it has something to do with the circuit design that they're implementing in both of these pedals. And if anybody knows, maybe they are a similar circuit, and that's how they implemented that here in this DS1 Wazacraft. So I'm going to land the plane with a couple final thoughts on the shootout and today's video overall. For me, the shootout was just fascinating. Again, you're looking at the crossroads of gain staging with what you have and what does that allow you to do versus just a pedal that can give you two distinct things to choose from. And then the dark horse in all of that is you have this new era of modeling. And while I'm focusing on this analog, because that's what I have and that's why I'm talking about it, but it's also what I know. But it doesn't mean I shouldn't know those things. I think it circles back to that conversation around, do you need this stuff? Isn't a modeler inherently good enough? And again, I'll say my answer to that is yes. It's great if you know how to use it and you're implementing it and you're getting the sounds you want. Because at the end of the day, it is on you. And so I will leave you with that sentiment. I look forward to touching base. Keep your eye out for an upcoming grudge match with the grunge pedal and the death metal. I said grunge metal. I don't know what I said there. The grunge pedal and the death metal pedal. Okay, I'm done. We're gonna leave you with that. Hey, I wish you all a wonderful week, and again, thank you to all of you who have subscribed to the channel. The one thing I'm not gonna do is ask you to do that on a regular basis. That's not what I'm about. I don't do this because I need subscribers. I do this because I'm enjoying it. I'm loving what I'm doing. And for those of you that are along for this ride, I'm thankful for each and every one of you. The work week is almost upon us. So enjoy your Sunday. And if you are at work this week and you're listening to this, hopefully it brought you a little joy and a little chuckle. Hey, I hope you had a chance to finish your cup of coffee or your drink of choice. And you know what? We'll see you next Sunday. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.